Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to quickly run through the diagram that is the sort of periodic table of emotional expressions that Dr. Tim Barber and I in our new book Expressly Human, Decoding the Language of Emotion, we derive this from first principles. It describes the space and what emotional expressions mean. And in some sense what it does is, here's all the stuff that we talked about in negotiation terms, in English. So like, I want more, and I'm totally serious, or here's my final offer. All the kind of stuff we do when we're negotiating or dealing with compromises and all that kind of stuff. There's a whole space of stuff that we talk about there. And then there's the whole space of emotional expressions. And what it tells us is how you can translate back and forth between these two things. What we really needed to evolve was a language for talking about this stuff. Not all of English, just this stuff about negotiations. And we needed a language to do that, which wasn't a proper normal language because we didn't have language, and none of the other social animals still have language, right? That's what emotional expressions do. So I'm going to try to quickly walk through how it is that our emotional expressions map onto this space. But the first thing we need to do is figure out, what does the space need to look like? So just imagine that you're trying to buy a house, and you've got your realtor, and the seller's, let's say, offering the house, listing it for $100,000. Now, any negotiation at first glance, it just is a bunch of offers back and forth. You say $85,000, and it says no. How about $98,000? You slowly rise, and the seller slowly falls. So there's obviously this horizontal back and forth, right? I want more. No, I want more. And slowly but surely, each of you sort of pushes and finds potentially, or you call and something, they say screw you, and you both go back to the market and you figure out how the market decides whether you had it. Maybe you find something that was much cheaper, in which case you were right, or you couldn't find something that cheap and you had to go spend more, in which case it turns out you were wrong. So the horizontal axis, we'll call it the horizontal axis, that I want more versus you want more, is pretty obvious. But there's another dimension that you may not have realized that happens in negotiation, although you know it in your bones, but you haven't maybe consciously realized it. And this comes up, for example, when you tell your realtor, okay, we've already gone back and forth a couple times, and my last offer was $92,000. I don't want to go any higher than that. So tell the seller $94,000, and this is my final offer. All right? This my final offer part isn't a left and right negotiation thing, right? What the heck is that? First of all, it's very emotional, right? What you have done is you've raised the level of seriousness. And now the seller's thinking to him or herself, all right, I better be careful in how I respond. This person's ready to walk. In some sense, this is to fight. Like when animals are arguing with something, they're ready to fight and see how things land by virtue of the way that nature decides, rather than coming to a negotiated settlement. And I'm super serious, or this is my final offer. That changes everything. All right, so there's actually two dimensions, because instead I could say, okay, $94,000, but let the seller know that I'm pretty open to discussion. Totally different. Now that's casual. We have actually two dimensions when we're doing negotiation, and we're doing this all the time. Those two dimensions are what you need to have what you might call the steering wheel of negotiation. You can always ask for more, you can always ask for less, and you can always make things more serious, at which point there's more reputation being bet and unbet, which I won't get much into here. If it becomes serious, now if I argue back, I'm making things more dramatic. And if people later see that I have more that I can potentially lose if I turn out to be wrong or I have to back down. So what you can see, I'm popping onto the screen, these are the two dimensions, and forget about the faces at first, just look at the words along the arrows. So I'm saying Tim is the co-author, and we're imagining in the book that we're arguing over zucchini bread. So Tim's previous offer was that he should get, 66% of the zucchini bread. And the left and right is like, no, I should get more. And versus the right is, no, okay, you should get more, I agree. The manager brought us zucchini bread, and we have to decide, what she really wanted, what was her intent with it, and we can always fight about it and go call her and decide. But this is what the argument is about. And we can also get more serious, say, look, I'm serious, I should get more, or less serious, casual. And also there's these diagonal directions, which concern how, I can show that I should get more in two different ways. I can say, no, I'm confident because I know something about Judy, the manager, versus, actually, I don't really know much about Judy, the manager, and her intent. That would be along that axis from I'm more confident to I'm less confident. And we might call those pride, like I'm really confident, versus humility. I don't really know. But I can also show that I should get more by saying, like, Tim, you don't even know. I know that you don't know, for these particular reasons. You've never even met Judy. I can come up with reasons for why he's less confident than he claims. Or I can say, actually, I get that. You've known Judy for years, and I can show respect. So that's a disdain versus respect axis along these diagonals. And when along these diagonals, if I do say, look, I know Judy, I've also made it, for reasons I can't really get into here, I've also not only been aggressive, but I've in some sense raised the stakes. It turns out that mathematically it's equivalent to becoming more serious and aggressive at the same time. This two-dimensional space is exactly the space of negotiation moves all of us use all the time if we're involved in any kind of negotiation, whether it's an asset negotiation like a house or a bike or whatever it is you're sort of haggling over. But all things in life involve constant negotiations. Even when two people are having a conversation, they're deciding who should be allowed to talk more, who can talk next, how much time should I. All the things that we're doing are constantly variants on notions of this general notion of negotiation. So we need the space. We need this two-dimensional space, and you know it in your bones, even if you hadn't realized that you know it. But there's a second two-dimensional space that we all need. Right. So before I move on to that, so notice we have nine emotional expressions that you need, and they're approximately like the words that we have here. And what I've done is in the pride, the humility, I've just put sort of angry eyebrows. They're not angry, just sort of stern eyebrows versus sort of humble eyebrows. And I've made the nose more respectful in the case of respect versus upturned for disdain. And you can see the other four cases at the top, left, right, and bottom are just variants on that, and they give you kind of this general notion of aggressive, where they're both disdainful and stern, that kind of thing. So but when social animals need to engage in a negotiation, they also need to confirm receipt of what the other person said. They need to tie themselves into a communicative dance. So one of the things that might happen in this conversation is say, okay, I get it that you're listing it for 100,000, but I think it should be more in my direction, namely 90,000. And then the seller says, okay, I see that you're asking for 90,000, but no, it should be 98,000. That is, when you do these kinds of, okay, you asked for this, but I'm asking for this, you're kind of making sure you're on the same page. You're confirming receipt of what they just said. Animals need that even more than we did. Social animals need that. They need to have a way of acknowledging receipt of what the other's offer was. So let's look at this next one here. On the inside box, I'm showing you the same emotional expressions we just talked about, which allow one to make any of these two dimensions of negotiation moves. More for me, less for me, more serious, less serious. But what I've done is I've showed them for Tim. So imagine that, remember before Tim had said something, but we didn't decide what it was. We were talking about what my response was going to be. Well, now I'm going to show Tim's responses to my previous, much earlier response. And for Tim, since he's interested in the opposite, more zucchini bread for him, his aggressive is to the right, whereas mine was to the left. I need to have a way, if Tim was to ask more for himself, I need to have a way as a social animal to acknowledge receipt that, oh, you're asking for more for yourself. And the way that we claim in the book that we do that is to signal unhappy. We signal unhappy not to say, oh, did you know that on the inside I'm feeling this? No. Animals felt unhappy for hundreds of millions of years. They all had deep emotions, but they were unexpressed. We express unhappy as a confirmation receipt to say, oh, okay, you're asking for more for yourself or less for me. That's bad for me. So I need a way to signal. Our claim is that unhappy acknowledges receipt of your aggressive emotional expression. Or more said the other way, unhappy acknowledges receipt that you're asking for more for you and less for me. Happy, on the other hand, and I'm showing it by just the shape of the mouth here in these diagrams, happy acknowledges that you're asking for more for me. And serious, if Tim, in this case, if Tim becomes serious, he goes, look, Mark, I'm super serious, or the seller says, I'm serious, and serious, I need a way to acknowledge that, oh my God, you've suddenly gotten serious. You've suddenly pushed the bar stool back at the bar and made this big sound. I got to react to, oh my God, it's okay. He wasn't just messing around. He's serious. I show you that I got that message by signaling surprise. But instead, if you say, oh, actually, let's just get a beer. I'm really calm here. Like, let's calm down. This is not a big deal to me. Then I can signal that by signaling relaxed. These are signals to the other person to let the other person know that you've gotten the message. They're not about letting them know what your feelings are. They're not feelings that are leaking out. They are signals. So this second two-dimensional space, the emotional expressions on the outside, are just my way of acknowledging to Tim that I got your message, but they're fundamentally different. Unhappy is acknowledging that you're asking for more for yourself, or therefore less for me, right? And of course, I do feel unhappy when that happens, but my signal of it is to acknowledge receipt of it. Now, we need both of these things. So you can see now there's these two-dimensional spaces. I put the acknowledgement one on top because in some sense, once Tim signals what he wants, I first acknowledge receipt, sort of conceptually. I first have to acknowledge what he is signaling. Okay, he wants more. So somewhere in that two-dimensional space is my acknowledgement, depending on what Tim said. But then after that, then I can say, well, in light of you asking for that, I'm going to ask for this, or I'm going to demand this. So the full emotional expression that I do is the combination of the one expression on the top and one expression from the bottom, which is what I really want. The expression on the top is acknowledging what you are asking for, and the expression on the bottom is me saying, well, but here's what I want instead. And we can combine these into one diagram as follows. The idea here is that at the center of each of these squares, there's 9 squares distributed around, and at the center of each of those squares is one of those 9 acknowledgments that we've been talking about. In the absence of any acknowledgement, that is, if Tim had never said anything and I'm just making a demand in the absence of anything, then we'd be in the center square. And if I ask for more, it's aggressive versus conciliatory. If I ask for more and become more serious, or I say like, I really know what Judy wants and that I'm pride, that's up to the left. And it's in the absence of anything else. But if Tim had just asked for more for himself, it moves us now, because now I have to acknowledge that with unhappy. And now my response is colored in that light. And what was pride in the center case, when there was no context of Tim having asked for anything, becomes something different. And we claim it's something like angry. Because here, I've acknowledged unhappy. I've said, you're asking for more for yourself and less for me, but I'm very confident that Judy wanted more for me. That's very different. So now if we move to the left, suppose that Tim had said, Mark, you can actually have more. So that moves us to the left square. Now, I acknowledge that by signaling happy, but suppose that I still become prideful. I show pride. I say, actually, okay, I get it that you are offering me more, but I still think that Judy offered, but I still think Judy wanted even more than that for me. So that's very different. It's like, I get that you want more, but I should get even more than that. Totally different. I'm not angry there. I'm more like smug, because I realize that you realize that I was right, but you still don't think that I'm right enough. Each notion that can possibly occur in a negotiation, each situation is different. What I do has these 9 qualitatively different possible demands that I might make in a negotiation. But each of those is colored differently depending upon what your previous demand was. And that moves us to a different part of the space. And so we end up with 81 different, qualitatively distinct negotiation situations. And they each feel fundamentally different than each other one. And we know that in our bones when we're talking about negotiation. We feel it in the situation. We know it's a different situation. And we can understand that it's a different negotiation situation that therefore has different implications. And there's an emotional expression term that roughly fits each of those. And this provides the mapping back and forth between those 2 spaces. And there's a third space that I haven't really talked about here, which concerns betting space. The bets become much bigger left and right when things go higher. You're making positive bets of reputation when you're asking for more. You're making unbets when you are conciliatory. And this, in some sense, there's a mapping between all 3 of these spaces. I recommend that you get our book to understand this more fully. It is, in our opinion, the periodic table of emotional expressions. It binds together a full understanding of what emotional expressions mean. And again, it doesn't just, it's something I've talked about before, it doesn't just allow us to understand emotional expressions in the sense of the facial expressions, the gestures, the intonations, the actual emotion terms. It allows us to understand what we're typically doing even in English. When we're doing English unemotionally, we're not using emotion terms, without intonation, we are still emotionally expressing because we use those terms to engage in emotion, to engage in negotiation talk. And negotiation talk just is emotion talk. They are the same things. It's just that now we have language, we don't have to use emotional expressions to do negotiation talk, but they have the same meaning. And that was your science moment.